My name is Chris Savage. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Wistia. Wistia is a video platform for marketers. So we give you tools so you can host, measure, improve, track how your videos are performing on your website. We also have a product called Soapbox that makes it really easy to make videos. And that's a Chrome extension that lets you record your webcam and your screen simultaneously, and that add transitions so you can make something that looks more professional.
Yeah, Soapbox is actually a kind of a new product from you guys, right?
Yes, we launched Soapbox about 2 years ago.
Okay.
So Wistia's been around for 13 years, so
that's right.
It's pretty new. Yeah.
That's right. How big is the company at the moment in terms of headcounts?
Headcount, we're about 115 people.
Mm-hmm. And you're comfortable to talk about revenue per year, roughly?
No, we don't disclose revenue.
Okay, that's totally fine.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
so let's dive right in. You, as a CEO, have obviously a lot of relationship with every sort of department, and during that, 10 years more actually building the company, which one do you think you've been closest to, at your heart?
I think the two areas that I've been closest to as we built the business have been marketing and product. And the early days, we were really close to product. But as we've grown, my co-founder, Brendan, really owns much more product. And I would say I'm the closest to what we're doing in marketing.
All right, cool. So let's explore marketing. You guys had a pretty phenomenal growth. And do you have any sort of, what would you attribute that to in context?
So in every story of growth, there's always a timing element, right? Like what options were available to you when you started and when you were gaining growth, and those options are constantly changing. So for us, we basically started to embrace content marketing really early. And we tried, almost like by accident, ended up making videos to teach people how to make video. And we did it at first because it was people writing in, asking questions about how did you light your video? And what microphone did you use? And we're like, this'll stop them from writing in questions. This'll be good. And so we're like, we'll make a video teaching people about how to create a lighting kit that's going to hopefully make your stuff look better. And we thought that would allow us to get back to making content about our product. And of course, what ended up happening is that the content about all those behind the scenes and the content about all the things related to our product ended up being where we really built an audience. And that ended up being how we scaled. And I think we just invested in that early, and we've continued to invest in content and push bigger. But ultimately, I think, we've built a brand in the space that means something to people, that is differentiated, and that ends up being why people pick us.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, especially the timely element. So nowadays, everything is like super noisy. So how do you compete brand to brand in that sort of environment when it comes to content?
So the way to compete today is to get incredibly focused on who your target customer is. And you want to be the person who is, or the company who is serving that target better than anybody else. And from a content perspective, that means finding a niche, like a group of folks who are what they care about, what keeps them up at night, what's going to help them be successful. If you're B2B, what's going to help them be successful at their job. If you're B2C, what's going to help them, feel more popular or attractive, or have more time with their family, or whatever the element is that you're selling. And you have to make content that is so engaging that people will watch that stuff at work, or they'll watch it or listen to it instead of what the mainstream media is giving them. And I think if you look at like the podcasting world and the podcasts that people listen to, we can see this already happening, where there's these incredibly niche focused podcasts about like the mental models you need to make decisions at work, or how to have like a really healthy work-life balance, or how to make sure that you are doing the pricing of your products properly. These are all incredibly focused things. What ends up happening in our world is when you make something that's super focused and it is the best thing out there for that audience, then they all know the other people who are going to care about that problem set too. And they actually help spread you throughout the niche of people who would care about it.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. How long did it actually take you to figure out what niche you wanted to go after? And was it like an easy decision at the time? What actually helped you making those decisions?
Yeah, I think, in some ways it was easy because we were small. So
Oh, that's
when we were
interesting.
looking.
Usually it's the opposite. Like when you're small, you got like so many different personas that it's really hard to actually pinpoint on one.
Yeah, because the reality is like, let's say you have 10 personas
Yeah,
and you're small.
that's right.
It doesn't hurt you as much to have 10 personas.
That's true too.
What hurts you is when you have 115 people and they're trying to decide which product to build and you have 10 personas. That hurts because everyone goes in a different direction. You suddenly go slower than you were going when you were smaller. You can't deliver on it, and it's almost like counterintuitive. But I think the bigger you are, the more focused you have to be, because you can't go in the same direction. You can't compete anymore. And when you're small, you got to try stuff because you don't have traction. So I think the most important thing is like, you might have 10 personas, pick one to focus on and give yourself enough time that you think you could make headway on that one persona. And ideally, you know exactly who it is. Ideally, you are talking to those potential target customers. You understand what you're building for and all that kind of stuff. That's the ideal case. But because so many people start companies without that, I think you just have to give yourself the ability to focus so you can know it's working or not. So for us, it was simply like, our journey from Wistia is we've actually had many different people that we focused on. Like our first customers used us to do private video sharing.
Yeah,
What
yeah.
that means
That's when I knew
is
you.
that,
Yeah,
yeah, and what that means is like we were competing with DVDs. That is like who our competition was in the early days. YouTube existed, Vimeo existed, all these other companies existed, but none of them were focused on helping people privately and securely share video inside their company. But we did that. So it was this tiny little niche, but we were able to serve them better than anybody else. And that allowed us to get traction. And then once we had enough of them, they started requesting other things that required broader problem solving. And so we just kept trying to figure out like, how do we stay focused on a part of the market that we can serve better than anybody else? And then as you get bigger, you broaden it a little bit, maybe in terms of the size of the problem that you're solving, but you still have to stay super, super, super focused on who your best customers are.
was there some niche that it wasn't super clear that you should drop them or not in order to be narrow and focused? Or
Yeah,
like,
I mean,
did it hurt, like saying like, oh, we're gonna lose like maybe 10% of our customers, but we think like this is the future and we're gonna go so
yes.
much bigger?
So it was funny. There was a moment actually where we were trying to decide what to do. We
Yeah,
had people who were using Wistia to privately share videos. At the time we called this publicly, but people using Wistia to share videos publicly. And then across the uses, we had people using Wistia for marketing, for training, and for sales, and for collaboration. And we couldn't make a decision. We were
yeah,
trying to decide what to do. So we're trying to go down all four paths at once. And I happened to go to this conference, Business of Software, and there was a CEO of this company called FreshBooks, which is an accounting
yeah.
software thing.
Yeah.
And he was there and gave a great talk. And I went up to him after. I was like, that was a great talk. He's like, yeah, what's going on in your world? Do you have any questions? And I told him this exact thing I just told you. And we said, we're trying to figure out what to pick. And he said, well, the most important thing is just picking one to focus on. And guess what? Like, if you pick one to focus on, you change your messaging, you change what you're building, those people will, if you're right, like they will sign up, they'll tell more people, they'll be great. But actually, all the other people who are using those for you for those other uses, if you're still the best solution, they're still going to sign up. It's just not going to propagate as quickly in those worlds. And when he said it that way, it was funny because it was like, oh, we should clearly be focusing on marketing. That seems like the best possible use for us. And we did that. And it was funny because even 2 years later, probably the highest percentage of customers who were using us for marketing, but it's probably still only like 40 or 50%. And it was like 25% of people were using us for internal collaboration, and 15% were using us for training, and the rest were using us for sales. It was just a funny thing. Like they were still signing up because if we were the best solution for those things, then someone would find that and use us that way. But by giving out the right message to the right target audience, they were able to engage so much better and so much faster that we could tell we picked the right group to focus on.
Yeah, I love the story. Like sometimes the challenges seems really big, and in fact, in retrospect, the solution was actually pretty easy, like you just mentioned.
That is, I think, a lot of building a company. Like a lot of it is most of the answers are actually pretty simple. It's just often hard to make the decision because saying yes to something means you're saying no to like 9 things.
That's right.
And when you're looking at opportunities every day, because opportunities will come up, someone will have an idea for something new, there'll be a trend in the market, there'll be some other partner that wants to do something. The hard part is actually saying no to all the stuff, and often saying no to great opportunities. But that is a sign of focus, and I think a sign of maturity. And I think that is one of the hardest things to figure out when you're small and you're trying to get traction, because someone comes over to you and they see what you're doing and you respect them and they're bigger than you and you want to say yes, and you should if it's on strategy, and you should not if it's not. And more than often, it's probably not going to be on strategy.
So how long did that take you to actually figure out, okay, this is the right direction, we're not going to go back and pick another niche?
So for us, it was probably, it was 3.5 years after we started before we really focused in on marketing. And we knew quickly that it was right. I think it was like 2 months in, 3 months in.
Okay.
Yeah. And it just changed the trajectory of the business. We were going along, and 3.5 years in, we had 30 paying customers. And after we made this shift, we had 200 2 months later. So it was just crystal clear. Something's changed. How we're engaging with customers changing. The problem that we're solving is changing. And that compounded things. So once we saw that, then we started being more confident in building more quickly features for marketing that were just for marketing, that weren't for marketing and sales and training and collaboration, which is kind of how we felt we had to think about it before. And as we did that, those folks who were using this for marketing would be more excited. They'd tell more people, they'd use more product. And so it compounded and helped us grow faster.
That was a pretty quick and viral, change, do you attribute everything to the change of branding or communication, because everything was like inbound?
No,
and then people were talking?
No, it was not. It was actually, so it was a shift in the product at the
Right.
same moment that it was a shift in the positioning, and it was a shift in business model. So up until that point, you had to do a demo if you wanted to use Wistia, and we didn't allow embedding by default. So because it was all a private system,
Yeah.
you could upload videos and use them, and people would email us and say, I want to embed this video. We'd like turn on the ability to actually embed that thing. And then when we switched, it was like, okay, we made it self-service, we made the pricing for marketers, and we added the ability to embed. And that's really what helped things take off.
Do you think that this event actually speed up your decision-making process now?
Oh yeah. We ran into the issue actually of like, we got really focused and spent a few years being really focused. Then we got less focused, and we tried too many different things again because
How did
we
that
kind of
happen?
got cocky.
Oh, okay. Cockiness.
You start, everything you're doing is working, and you're thinking, I have all the answers.
I'm on top of the world. Got it.
And you kind of start to think like, oh, well, I could branch out a little bit more, and we could handle more different things. And what at least what happened in our case, we started to branch out, and people were like, yes, they're branching out. They're finally doing it. They're going broader. And then it was the recognition that the tax of going broader was actually much greater than I ever could have imagined, in terms of complexity on the business, complexity like on the high level of the business, like how to prioritize, complexity in our sales experience, complexity in the support experience, complexity in marketing, complexity in product. And so by going broader, we made everything much more complex. And we ended up, for probably 2 years, most of the product things we were building almost were all really core things to every use case you could imagine. So we made the product better and faster, and delivery of video got better, and the player got better, but we weren't pushing as hard and innovating on the marketing side because we had too many competing priorities. And we realized that we'd made a mistake there. And so we went back and focused again, and it took us, that time it took a little bit longer because now we had to unwind things. So it probably took like 6 or 9 months of being more focused again, and then realizing, we should have stayed like this the whole time.
Was it a very painful moment, or once the realization was made, like it's like, okay, it's clear and it's all good?
Yeah, I think once the realization was made, we were able to move relatively quickly.
Yeah.
There's of course tons of painful moments and tons of mistakes.
Yeah, I want to hear them.
Yeah, well, I think Um, we made a pretty big mistake. Probably the biggest mistake we've made at Wistia was we had gotten this advice that we were too profitable. So we had about, at this point, 10 million in revenue and a few $1,000,000 in profit. We were growing quickly. And everyone I talked to was like, whoa, you're profitable and you're growing that fast? Like, hey, just imagine if you weren't profitable. Imagine if you were investing more into growth. And that was going to be the thing that was going to probably increase the valuation of the business. And at that point, we weren't really sure what we wanted to do with the company. So increasing the valuation of the business seemed like a good idea.
It's a good deal. Yeah.
Growing revenue faster seemed like a good idea. And everyone I talked to said the same thing. So we thought we were idiots. And so at some point when everyone's saying the same thing, you're like, well, maybe we are wrong. And so my co-founder, Brendan, and I switched how we were managing the business.
Yeah.
And instead of keeping the business profitable, we just took the throttle and we threw it down. We said, we're going to put everything into growth. And so we started hiring much faster, spending way more money on trying to acquire customers, doing tons of different things than what we were doing before, because we felt like, oh, we were profitable, but we weren't doing these different tactics and these different things. And if we only just layer on the new different stuff, then suddenly the business will grow. And we started running the business at a loss. And we've been profitable, so we built up cash. So we were just eating into the cash to grow. And it was funny because you asked a question at the beginning of this, like what's the head count of Wistia? And everyone was asking me then, what's the head count? And I was like, well, we're 30. Oh, and now we're 45, and now we're 55, now we're 65. So every time I talk to someone, they'd be like, wow, you must be doing great. I was like, yeah, it feels like I'm doing great. And then we did all this like externally facing stuff, and everyone was like, wow, you're doing this external stuff. You guys are doing great. I'm like, we're doing great. But the reality was that it didn't actually impact our revenue growth rate, really.
Yeah.
And in fact, it just meant now we were running at a loss. And so when we were trying to make the big creative moves and the big creative pushes and the product decisions where you don't have all the data and you have to trust your instincts, it became harder to make those decisions. And we had historically become very long-term focused. Everything got really short-term focused, because if you have a month where you're losing $200,000 and you have a plan of the revenue going up the next month, these are all real numbers, by the way. You have the plan that revenue is going to go up 50K next month, and that's going to counterbalance this. And you're doing the math on how many months you have left of cash in the bank. And then the next month, the revenue doesn't go up and you lose 250,000.
That's no good.
Oh, crap. And so it just changes your whole mindset.
Yeah.
It makes everyone really short-term focused. And it actually wasn't until we made that mistake and then executed on it for a couple of years. And it actually was not until we had the opportunity to sell the business. And my co-founder, Brendan, and I were actually considering selling the company. And we had never talked about how the company was no longer fun to run. And we had not discussed the stress that we were kind of dealing with, because we didn't want to admit how bad it was. But the second you're talking about selling the company, guess what? That's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And we realized if we sold Wistia, that we would try to build another business together, and we would try to make Wistia again, but the Wistia again that we loved. Like the Wistia that was taking creative risks, the Wistia that was investing in brand, the Wistia that was doing self-service product, the Wistia that was doing all the stuff that we felt like had been core to us that had kind of been lost as we were trying to grow too fast. And actually in that case, what we decided to do is we thought, well, this will be pretty silly if we sell the business and then 2 years later we go to try to jump back in the video space and build another brand. And we knew the people we'd hire, we knew all the stuff we'd do. Why don't we just fix our problems? And so we decided not to sell, and then ended up raising debt so that we could buy out our investors, give our employees liquidity, and set the business back on a course for to be profitable and to be more long-term focused.
Man, that's quite a journey. So there's multiple directions I want to take this, but let's do a slight digression in a sense and talk about the personal toll about living those moments, because obviously when we are in the crisis, it's always different. The decisions are different and so on. Were there some specific signs that sort of woke you up, okay, this is not really how it should go, or did you actually just ride the wave until it crashed to the bottom?
Yeah, I think there was this. Looking back, the signs were I was no longer making time for myself and self-care. So I was gaining weight, wasn't working out, was drinking too much, was not sleeping well enough. And at this point, I had one kid, and she was almost two. And so she was really fun and a lot of work. And I remember having this feeling of like, I should be spending more time with her. And I was trying to spend more time with her. And historically, I'd had a good work life balance, and that was kind of going away. It was one of those things where it was like, I would come home, I would, we'd play, eat dinner, put my daughter to bed, and then I would work. I would work for a couple hours. I'd be on phone calls, and I would work late into the night. And then I would wake up early because you have an almost 2-year-old and be super tired and drink a ton of coffee to try to get through the day. And it was like, well, there's no way I'm working out under these circumstances. And so all of this stuff kind of it kind of compounded to make for quite a stressful environment. And looking back, I think I was just not as clear headed. Like I couldn't make decisions as quickly. Yeah, it just was like kind of a fog.
Got that. Okay, so did at some point, when you were like hiring a lot of people, did you actually consider the metric, when everyone's telling you, hey, that's great, that's fantastic, just, reinvest and so on. Did you actually consider the revenue per head, or was that like not a variable that you guys actually considered in order to determine if the business is healthy?
We looked at it, and our revenue per employee was very high before this, and then it dropped down, but the numbers it was still pretty high.
Was still good.
It wasn't like it was a bad metric. Like I would compare it to a venture business, and they'd be like, "Whoa, like you guys are doing amazing." It was more that the change in mentality that came from running at a loss of that scale. And it just made it so that even when we said we were going to do something that's long-term focused, it got evaluated over the short term. Because guess what? And if you're having a rough month in March, because all those new things you did in February didn't work, then you reevaluate everything. Like there was a moment we sent the email to the team. It was like, if anyone has good ideas for short-term revenue growth, like let us know. And people filled out this spreadsheet of like 100 ideas. And a lot of them were good, and so we tried them. And so now you're like have this list of 100 ideas of short-term revenue growth things. And you do a bunch of stuff. It's like tiny, tiny little improvements, but we weren't making the bigger changes and the bigger decisions that we actually needed to make. Which everybody is different, I think, in their psychology of how they feel and think when they're running a company. But I think what Brendan and I realized for ourselves was like, when we're profitable, we have profitable confidence. And for us, that lets us believe in our decisions. And when there's a decision that's on the fringe of like, you don't really have enough data, your instincts tell you it's going to be right, but it's going to take some indeterminate amount of time to invest in it. What do? You're running a loss, pretty hard to do that. When at least for me, when you're profitable, much easier to do. And we just kind of figured that out. And so it was funny because raising the debt would force us to be profitable. We thought that would allow us to do our best work, and then that would actually let the business grow faster and be more focused. And that all of that ended up being true.
Okay. So let's explore that a little bit more. When you're growing like so fast, it obviously has a difference not just on your decision but also on the culture. Was the culture sort of impacted and then you had to course correct, or was it actually, no, it was still the right culture, it was just like the top sort of like direction that was wrong?
Yeah, a lot of the elements of the culture were still there and were right. But what was happening is that the culture was not evolving to the set of challenges that we were facing. And so there were values that we had that are great values in general, but they were in conflict with the things we needed to do and tried to do.
Can you give an example of that?
Yeah, like we had a value for a long time of customer first.
Right.
And generally, great value. Why wouldn't you want to put the customer first?
That's right.
For years, that had been critical to us in getting growth, because it was like, we're going to do the most amazing support on earth. And that is going to get our customers through every challenge they have. And then they're going to stick with us. They're going to tell other folks. Well, there was a moment in there when we realized we had to shift towards more product innovation. I described some of this of like losing our focus and realizing we have to go back to marketing and focus more on innovating there. And so we needed to shift our values and evolve our culture to be more around product leadership and innovating and taking risks. And we also needed to get everyone focused on the long-term value of the business. So one of our values is long-term company thinking. And so customer first was no longer a value.
Yeah.
And taking care of customers is incredibly important. But what we realized was that strategically, if that was going to be the most important thing, then we should probably focus on the enterprise segment of the market, because that is the place where like people spend so much money, you do custom things for them, that service at that level will be what differentiates you. But for us, we were always more interested and thought there was a bigger opportunity to focus on small and medium-sized businesses. And for them, we cannot always put them first. We're going to try our darndest to do it, but our solution needs to more default to a product solution than a service solution. And so that was like an example of like, people were sitting here unclear about how to make decisions, and almost like parts of the business were operating differently based on what they thought they should do. And so that created a lot of friction. And then I think the other thing that we kind of lost in there was this really healthy question, which is when someone wants to do something new and it sounds great, you should just say, that sounds great. Is there something we should stop doing so we can do the new thing?
I love this one, yeah.
And there always is, because you're trying stuff and not everything works. And we lost people asking that question. And so people will be like, that's a great new idea. We'd be like, yes, that is a great new idea. They'd say, I need 2 people to do this. We'd say, fantastic, go hire 2 people to do it. They would go and do it. And then we ended up with these zombie projects and zombie initiatives that no one was questioning, and unfortunately had great people on them. And that sucks when you have great people working on a project that isn't working, but if everyone admits the project's not working, what are they going to do? And so it got us in this very, very weird spot where we had initiatives where it almost was shifting things towards being political, because people felt like to get resources for those projects, there was going to have to be some political wrangling, which is really bad. Like that's bad cultural stuff. And that's completely gone now. So there's no more of that at all. And everyone will say, for doing this new thing, is it something we're going to do forever? Is it something that's going to be core to what we do? Is it something that's going to make things really different? Is there like a huge opportunity? If it, checks all those boxes, is there something we should stop doing to start doing it? And if there isn't, then fantastic, go get some new people and put them on it. But if there is something, let's ask that question at the same time.
Did you lose some people over this story, like having them loss of morale and things like that?
Yeah, we had a very hard time in there where before we did the buyback, we had people who were joining us because Wistia is so creative. Like they would watch our videos, they'd look at our brand, they'd look at the product and be like, wow, all the creative risks you can take, that's amazing. We're like, I know, it's amazing. We built a utopia.
Come on, Johnny.
And then, all the stuff started changing and everything got really short-term focused, and there was much less emphasis on that. So we had some core people who quit. And let me tell you, when those people quit, everyone's looking and they're like, what the hell just happened? Like that, I joined Wistia because those people are there. And then after we did the buyback, that was a moment of liquidity for the team too, because we've been giving folks options, and especially early employees got lots of options. And so there's some people who got liquidity and decided they wanted to leave. There's people who only wanted to be at Wistia because they thought we were going to sell the business and they wanted to leave. There are people who decided there's a big strategic shift coming, so this is a good time to leave. And so we had a bunch of people leave, some voluntary and some involuntary. And that was very tough on the business. Honestly, it was funny because Brendan and I were suddenly sleeping incredibly well. Like I would go home, go to bed all through the night, not a care in the world, wake up, feel great. Like that was from the moment we decided to do the buyback, I felt like that. But it created all this chaos in the company. And it took us probably 4 months to kind of navigate that and get to a place where, everyone who was here wanted to be here for the thing that we're doing now. And then since everyone we've hired wanted to be here to build a business the way we're building a business now. And that's been amazing, but that transition was tough.
Oh yeah, super cool. I'd like to take the thing in a slightly different direction, also, similar. What are some of the key learnings that you had in that position of leadership. Some of the things that you discovered, and if you knew them earlier, then it would have made things much smoother.
Yeah. So some of the key things I learned through all of this was the power of focus and being clear about what you want to be. We were afraid to say, like, we want to be a lasting business. We don't want to sell. Even though that's what Brennan and I had always wanted to do, I think we had never articulated and said it clearly for fear that we might lose some great people or partners would want to work with us or something. And of course, the opposite thing happened, which is like the moment we finally said that, it attracted all the people who cared very deeply about it.
Where do you think this came from? Is it like the sort of like normal external dogma by VCs and stuff like that? Or is just the ecosystem?
Yeah, there's definitely.
Where do you think that comes from?
I think there's just this culture in startup land that the best thing you could do is sell a business. And that's how you're going to become super rich. And that's the path that most people go down. And honestly, when we started Wistia, that's what we thought we were going to do. We thought we were going to make this company and sell it in 6 months. Like, I did not expect to be where I am. And I didn't understand how much joy could be created by like running something that you love to run. So yeah, I think it just pervades the culture. It's in everything. All the advice about how to raise money, about how to get your valuation up, about how to grow faster, about how to be the next billion-dollar business. And like the companies that are the exception to the rule that will actually go do that are incredibly rare. And I think people know if they don't push really, really hard, they're probably not going to be that exception. And so it's the advice that everyone gets, even though it only really makes sense for like less than 1% of the folks who are building companies. And I think it was just like all of that dogma and advice and, friends building companies, people who I respect to have done it, that kind of put that pressure on us.
What does that change in terms of your view to people giving you advice now?
I think it's the job of an entrepreneur to pick and choose what advice they listen to. And you may get advice from an advisor who 80% of the stuff they say, right on the money for you. And 20%, the exact opposite. And as an entrepreneur, you are going to know more about your business, more about the problem you're solving, more about your customers than anybody else who's doing it. And if you have a direct competitor, they're probably, if it's working properly for you, like you probably are each slightly focused on different things, and each of you are the experts at that thing. And you have to get to a place where you trust your own ability to decide if this is good advice or bad advice. And that is hard to do. But it is one of those mental exercises that when done properly you'll hear things that are like, yes, this does fit with my view of the world. This makes sense with the types of risks that I want to take. If I'm wrong and I take this advice, I'm going to be okay with that personally. That's probably good advice to take. But if it's one of those things where it's like, this doesn't make sense with my sense of the world, if I'm wrong with this, I'm going to ruin the business, or I will not be okay with that. And you have to kind of filter all the advice through that. I think another piece that I learned was the value as a company gets bigger of really investing in having a crystal clear strategy for the business, crystal clear communication plan, and making sure that as the company is constantly changing and evolving, everybody in the company has the right information to make the decisions they need to make. And I was afraid for a long time that org structure, communication structure, all of these things would actually stifle our ability to be creative. And what I learned was by making really clear guidelines and really clear constraints and having everyone have the same, the right communication, understand where we're going, why we're doing, the opposite thing happened. And we got more creative because people knew where they could take risks. And when they didn't know where they could take risks, there were some people really good at it, and there were some people who were bad at it. And it's like you have to create the constraints, basically.
Yeah, I was interviewing someone in a very big company that was actually managing only purely by metrics, and it was really interesting how just saying like, this is what I really care about, then how they actually go and then execute within that framework.
Yeah.
What's your view and your advice for people on the managerial side of things to reach that, still that creativity, yet keeping it, under a certain scope or have
Yeah.
some boundaries and limits?
I would say you need to help your team understand what goals they should have and where they should operate. And then you should be very clear about, if we're talking about metrics, like what metrics you can define and are clear, what part of this can be clearly defined and measured, and what part of it is going to be qualitative, and what part of it is going to be feeling. And you can say that up front. And the reality of a lot of stuff is like, a lot of the things you're going to learn, if you do the right qualitative tests, you're going to learn faster than the quantitative ones, because you're just mostly not at a scale where a small team can suddenly, run an A/B test that's seen by 50,000 people in a week and blah, 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 and get an answer quickly. But you are in a place where you could do user testing with 10 folks, and that's often enough. And so I think it's just trying to set up front, like the constraints of what success looks like. And I also think that as a manager, you have to tell people how you like to work. You have to say, this is how I work. This is how I like people to come prepared to meetings. This is what I expect of you. Tell me what you expect of me. Like, have a very open meta conversation about what successful work is going to look like on your team. And I think that's like critically important, because it creates the right conduits for communication, and it helps everyone stay on the same page.
Do you have to repeat that over and over, or is it like usually it's once in terms of setting expectations, in terms of communications? And how do
I
you
think
reinforce if you reinforce?
so. You can tell people to do something over and over and over, and if your actions don't line up with what you're telling them to do, then they will just follow whatever your actions say to do.
Nice.
And like, it's very simple. You have to lead by example, and that becomes more and more true the bigger and bigger an organization gets, because on average, people spend less time with you. So in Wistia today, 115 people. There's people on the team who I, talked to them, and we've been in a meeting or two, but like, we don't hang out. They're not sending me emails. They're not sending me Slacks, all this kind of stuff. If I talk to them and sit with them at lunch one day and I mention something that I care about or something that I'm doing, from their world, that's 100% of what we've talked about. And so they will think of my priorities and the things that I care about and things I'm worried about, and whatever comes up, they're going to think of that as being the dominant thing that's on my mind. That's a very natural thing. And it's a very powerful thing. And when used properly, you can create enormous change in your organization just by setting the right example that you want. And when used improperly, you can create enormous amounts of dysfunction. And so I think a lot of it comes back to like, model the behavior you want and be super self-aware of the kinds of systems that you are setting up without meaning to. And, for example, for us, for years, we tried to have recognition at Wistia at an all hands meeting, we'd get up and be like, look at all this great work that somebody did, and everyone would clap. But I'm not in the details of a lot of stuff, so I don't know how much great work everyone is doing specifically, and who's doing what. And I thought we were doing a great job of recognition, because every time we got up there at all hands meeting, we're saying this. We did an employee engagement survey, and it was like 38% of people said that we were doing a great job of recognition at Wistia. And it was brutally hard for me to see, because I thought I was setting an example. But the example I was setting is, when you're at a meeting, get up in front of people and talk about it. But I was also setting the example of like, we're not getting in the details on this. No one else is getting up there and saying anything. And so we embraced 15-5, if you know it.
No, what's that?
It's high five. It's a tool where every week you fill out the answers to some questions. It's supposed to take 15 minutes to fill it out. It's supposed to take your manager 5 minutes to look through it. And it's like a formal way of communication between an employee and a manager. And then part of that has this feature called high fives, where I can just I can mention somebody and say why I'm giving them a high five. So it's a public recognition, and it shows up in 15.5 and it shows up in Slack. And so we realized we have to change how this is working. And so as a senior management team at Wistia, we started using 15.5 for ourselves. And we were giving each other recognition and recognition of the other people we were working with. And then we asked the company, like, hey, we think everyone should try 15.5. But because we were actually doing it, then all managers started doing it. Everyone started doing it. And it became this very simple answer to the problem where suddenly everyone was giving recognition to each other and they were giving recognition about the right stuff. And so then when you look at our employee engagement surveys, probably like 2 quarters after that, we'd gone from 38% of people saying that we did a great job of recognition at Wistia to literally 90%. And it came down to modeling the behavior and having something simple that scaled across the business. And it took literally 15 minutes a week per person and was actually another form of communication between managers and employees.
That's a great example. How does that tie back to the hiring process? Because you make it sound, true or false, of course you're going to tell me, but you make it sound like, everyone can join Vista and be successful. In reality, like in any business, some people are good fit and some people are not. So what is kind of your filtering or what do you look for when you're hiring that you think is going to model, that type of behavior that you want at work?
Yeah, so we're looking for people who have like intrinsic values. They come in with values that align with the values that we're looking for. People who are curious and smart and thoughtful and inclusive, and a bunch of other things. And then with any role, the way that we do it is we'll do a phone screen, and then we'll have a first round where you are interviewing the people that you'd be working most closely with. And usually, if you get through that first round, we ask you to do a project of some kind. And the project is designed to be as close to the actual work as possible. And the goal here is like that somebody takes the project and they do it, and then the final day, the final round is really like working through the work that they have done in a way that is similar to how they would actually do the job. And this is intended to help us find the right folks who can work at Wistia using our values, and in a way that it is additive and changing the company to be better. And it's also to be clear to somebody that like there are parts of Wistia that I think are probably very hard for people whose personalities don't align with how we work. So you can get a sense of that through the interview process. Mm-hmm. And so if it's not working out, hopefully it's not just something that's like, oh, Wistia doesn't want me. Hopefully it's also a situation where like, well, I can also see why I wouldn't want them, or I wouldn't want to be on this team, or whatever the thing is. And once we started introducing projects, it made a really, really big difference. And of course, they're very, very different based on the team, very, very different based on the type of work. Sometimes, all of that. But that's been one of the pieces that's been incredibly helpful to us, making sure we're getting the right folks.
Yeah, in what way project really helps? Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, it helps because everybody gets to see what the actual work is like. So, there's lots of people who interview really well and they don't do great work. They know what to say when asked.
Oh, sorry, my bad. You mean project at interview level, not
yes.
in project within Wistia and then people interviewing for their projects. Okay, got it.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So hard skills is easy to assess usually, but the soft skill like curiosity, how do you guys actually do that? What did you find worked?
We ask really specific questions, and all the questions are written in advance for every role. And, the idea is that when you're talking to the different folks that are interviewing you, they have a different goal of what they're trying to learn. And so we write down for every role that we're hiring for, what are the skills that we need? What does success look like at 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? And what kinds of soft skills would that person need to accomplish that? What kind of hard skills would they need? And then the goal is that in the interviews, we're able to tease those things out. And it's obviously, hiring is hard. It's not easy. And I think everyone says this because it's true. Like there's
I know, crazy.
It's hard to do well.
So what are the easy do and don'ts in interviews, you would say then, for hiring someone?
Say that again?
What would you say are the easy do and don'ts when you're, in the hiring process for getting the right type of people at your company?
Yeah, I think the first thing is start with what success looks like in the job and try to architect the interview process so that you're getting closer to an understanding of, can this person be successful in the role that we want them to do, which also sometimes like people haven't thought through that enough. And it forces, it might even shift what's in the job description of what you're looking for, which I think is incredibly important. I think in the interviews themselves, you have to respect the interviewee's time. They're out on a limb and they're taking a risk, and you should try to architect a process where they know what they're coming in for. Like, they can see it. They have an expectation. You can reduce stress for them, even on like which building they're going to and who they're talking with and how the process works. And like, so the do's I would say is like, try to make the person as comfortable as possible so that you're actually getting the answers you would get if they were on the team, right? Like that is what you're looking for. I'm not looking for someone who interviews really well. I'm looking for someone who would be great on the team. And sometimes you have people who are awkward because they're getting really stressed. And it's like, well, are you stressed because it's an interview, or are you stressed because of this type of work? And that's a thing you can actually try to tease. You can tease those things apart. And when you do that, you end up hiring better people. So it's, I think all of those things are important. And then in terms of don't be an asshole. Don't make, always like never put yourself in a spot where you're not following up with people. Treat people with humanity. Like the people that come in, if you're hiring for a role and you meet with 10 people and invite one person to join, there's 9 people you interact with who are going to be walking around probably wherever your business is, or if it's remote, they're going to be on the internet. Try to take care of those folks. Like, those folks are going to be probably a big part of how your brand is built, is the people who you don't hire. And I think that's why I think it's really important to make a really equitable process, to make it really clear up front about what expectations are, to try to communicate really well with folks, so that if they're not the person you end up hiring that time for the role, like, try to tell them why and try to create a great experience.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you actually see everyone who is a candidate as an opportunity for, being an evangelist, or spreading your word, or bringing other candidates? Is that really the point of view or that you adopt here?
Yeah, I just think it's a long-term view, but for Wistia, so we have 115 people. We have probably interviewed 20 times that many, over the years, a couple thousand folks. And yeah, it's a lot. That's a lot of interactions, a lot of touch points with people. And I feel like, we're here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. This town is not that big. Like, if we don't treat people well, it will really create issues for us. Would have already created issues, and it will create issues for us in the future. And so that's why we try really hard to really be clear with people. What we're looking for is the best fit at this moment, at this time, for this role. It doesn't mean that there isn't another role in the future that's not going to work. Doesn't mean that we're going to get it right, but we're going to try, and what we're going to commit to is like a really fair and equitable process, and try to be transparent about how things work up front.
Yeah, you mentioned where you're located. Have you considered, remote employees, and what's your view on that whole trend? I would say.
Yeah, so I think I am pro remote. We have some remote employees of about 10.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that we have figured out how to make it work at Wistia is that, like, folks who are remote still come into the office on some cadence. And so the most remote are people who come in like once a quarter.
Yeah.
And then there's some people who come in once a month, and then some people come in, 2 days a week. And I think about it all as a spectrum of flexibility. And we encourage very flexible working. We want people to be able to take time to pick their kids up from school and do the other things in their life they need to do. And a lot of this is centered around our long-term approach. And so we have very flexible working already. People who are the most remote are just kind of like in the most flexible situation. So I think it makes a lot of sense. I think it lets you hire great people and that you wouldn't be able to otherwise. I think it helps you retain great folks when people are moving. And there's, the reason they're moving is not because of you, is because of some other life reason. Yeah, but I would also say it's hard to do well. Like, that was another thing that took us a couple of years of having remote folks to like really shift the culture so that people ask the right questions. When you're in a meeting, the first thing someone says is anyone remote? Like, oh, yes, they are. It's like, all right, every meeting room has a Zoom room in it. So every meeting room someone can call into, and all of that kind of, you have to do that stuff well to make it work. And then you need rigid communication structures. And we kind of found our way to rigid communication at the same time that we had some remote folks, and we went, and I'm sure for them, it went from, I don't really know how to know what's going on to, oh, this is when decisions are made. This is how things are communicated.
Yeah, can you give very quickly some example of what a rigid communication looks like for you?
Yeah, so we do.
A thing that worked in communication, a thing that didn't work in communication, or that you tried, or maybe you had success from the get-go.
Yeah, so for us, the way our communication structure works is we lay out at the beginning of the year a schedule that says when, we've set goals for the year, and then when we're going to check in on those goals, and those are quarterly. We have these quarterly strategic discussions where we spend a day on each important company goal. We have all the right people who are working on that goal in the room so we can make decisions. Before that, all the materials get sent out so everyone can get up to speed on all of, everyone who's involved knows why we're sitting there and what we're doing, what we're trying to discuss. We do all those discussions in one day, and then the senior management team gets together and we discuss the priorities that came out of the discussion. So like, what roles do we need to hire for? What's the difference in budgets? All that kind of stuff. So then we can make a decision that says yes to these things, no to those things, and why. We communicate that to everyone who's there. Then we have an all manager meeting after the senior manager meeting. So all managers hear about this. They ask questions. They commit or they disagree and commit. And then we have an all hands meeting. And at the all hands meeting, by the time we're communicating stuff, and there might be a big change, that came out of these discussions, by the time we're communicating it, every single person on the company, they can go to their manager and say, what's the deal? Their manager has an answer. That's turns out to be very important to help things stay calm and focused. And when those things are happening, and when we're making budget decisions as well. So if there's something else you want to request, how to do it. And then following up on that, my co-founder Brennan and I go and we meet with every team across the company briefly to help answer questions, to do Q&A. And so they know they're going to meet with us monthly. If there's things in their mind, they can get ready and bring those things up. If there's something big and new that's happened, we know we're going to be able to address it. And so in the course of a week, we go from big new things are figured out, decisions are made, change direction, change budgets, what have you, communicated to everybody, answer questions.
Got it. And roughly what's the size of the teams?
Some of the teams are, 20 folks, and some of the teams are like 5.
What's the biggest
one?
There's
A mix in there.
What's what department is the biggest one? Just curious.
Yeah, I think product engineering design is the biggest. That's probably 50 people, 45 people.
Got it. Chris, I want to be respectful of your time. Let's finish it off with 2 classical questions. The first one is, would you have any book you would recommend to other people in your sort of situation on your journey? Or it could be a podcast, it could be, some other type of resources. You mentioned in conference, for example, that was also a good one.
Which one was?
You mentioned also conferences at some point that give you like a good
so
good
Business
idea.
of Software is a conference that I love that really just talks about the business of software. There's a mix of companies that are there, from very small, I think the first time we went, we were probably 4 people, to giant businesses. And the cool thing is that it's probably 400 folks. And so you can actually really go connect to the people you want to connect with there. And I've learned tons from that conference. In terms of books, the books that I think it really depends where in your journey you are. The Hard Thing About Hard Things, I thought was really good.
Yeah.
The Score Takes Care of Itself was another one I thought was really good. Drive by Dan Pink was incredibly important to me in terms of how you set up a team to be motivated and care about the work that they're doing.
Nice.
Which is, really, really, really important. What else? Patrick Lancioni, he wrote The Advantage. He wrote The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Those are really great books to read when your company is a little bit bigger. You're dealing with more people issues and team structure issues and communication issues. Those are all really good ones to read. And then I listen to a lot of different podcasts, but one of the ones on business that I love the most is just How I Built This. I think sometimes you just need more inspirational stories about how people really you build these iconic companies, and I think that's been a great one.
Yeah, I heard that as well. Good stuff. So finally, if people want to come in touch with you, Chris, or know a little bit about your company, what should they do?
So you can find me on Twitter at csavage. Check out wistia.com, wistia.com. Our products are there, and we have a couple series that we're doing. So we had this documentary we did last year called 110-100, which is about the link between money and creativity. And we have a series that's out now called Brandwagon, where I meet with folks about how they build brands. So I'd love if you check all that stuff out.
Lovely. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.